Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us on this Reuters webinar, which poses the question, is AI, or artificial intelligence, set to revolutionize medical affairs? And if so, how so? If the discussions are anything to go by in our preparation calls, you are in for an absolute treat hearing from our expert panel, and I don't think they're going to run out of things to say. So over the next hour, we plan to dispel some of the myths, discuss practical use cases today, but also ponder some of the potential applications of artificial intelligence in medical affairs for tomorrow. And perhaps most importantly, consider how we, as the pharmaceutical industry, can lead this positive change to drive improvements in patient outcomes globally. So before diving in and just going around the panel and getting to know them, there's just a couple of bits of housekeeping. We've set up a poll, which we would really appreciate you filling in. It's just 4 options. Do you work in a marketing, market access, medical, or key account manager role? Because that will help us guide the discussion. And wow, so 79 out of 202, 45% already filled. That will help us guide the discussion. Let's have a look at that. 20 seconds, 140 people. So marketing, 27 out of 157, 18%. Medical affairs, predominantly the majority by far, 124 out of 173. So about 3/4 of the audience in medical affairs. So that's super helpful. Thank you so much for participating. We'll leave that running in the background. And then the other little bit of housekeeping is we've got a Q&A. We're really keen to try and make this as interactive and informative as possible and as tailored to our audience. So feel free to use the Q&A for questions, and we'll try and answer as many of them as we can. And if you want to just introduce yourself in the Q&A, feel free to just put what you want in there about you and your background so we can make the webinar as engaging for you as possible. With that in mind, we're going to go just whip round and do sort of 60-second introductions. I'm Kishan. I work as a Senior Director in Global Medical Affairs at Bayer, and my role is around digital and cardiovascular. I've worked in industry for 5 years and held roles at AstraZeneca and Sanofi, and a doctor in the NHS for a decade before that. And I really like cycling. So I'll be moderating the webinar today, and that's the most you'll hear from me. It's just going to be asking questions and passing to the panel. So I'll hand over to, well, let's go around in the order that they're on the screen. So if we start with Natasha and then Neeraj.
Thank you, Kishan, and yeah, thank you everyone for attending today. My name is Natasha Hansjee, and I'm an innovation catalyst at Roche Global. I've been working at Roche for nearly 19 years in multiple roles, mainly commercial. I am a mother. I am an executive business coach and also an absolute complete sports freak. So yeah, I can completely relate to you, Kishan, jumping on your bike. But actually, I guess AI was the first time I heard about AI was my brother studied that back in the 80s, and I thought he was just playing with robots all day long. I didn't actually envision that I'd be here today on a panel talking about it myself as a non-expert. So here I am, and very excited to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Natasha. So hi all, I'm Neeraj Goel Mittal. I head the Global Data and Analytics and AI at Weave Healthcare, which is the global subsidiary of GSK Pharmaceuticals. My team has been working on AI/ML use cases predominantly, and I truly believe that AI/ML has the capacity to bring business value from data. So really, really passionate about this. I've been with pharma industry for more than 15 years. Before that, of course, worked with various other sort of industries, but particularly with pharma, I do believe that AI and generative AI is going to bring enormous change. Something interesting about myself. So I did not like sports and exercise much. So unlike Kishan and Natasha, but somehow a few years back, my son motivated me to do martial arts, karate. And last year I did achieve my karate black belt. So I like it. And I also associate with there's a new concept of neuroplasticity where they encourage you to learn something completely new. So I think this has worked wonderfully well for me. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's very interesting. We won't disagree with you then if you're a black belt in karate. So what Neeraj says goes. And then we'll go John and then Dee.
Thanks, Fish. Hi, everyone. My name is John, and I'm Senior Director and Global Lead for Medical Education here at Kite, which is the cell therapy arm of Gilead, and specialize in CAR T cells. I'm a physician by background, and I've been in pharma coming up to 7 years now. Something interesting about myself is I enjoy playing tennis, and I recently took up paddle tennis, and I'm looking for partners. So if anyone is in West London and would like to have a game, feel free to get in touch.
Cool.
Hi, my name is Dipanwita. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Sorcero. And our company is built on a very, very simple premise, which is that the insights to improve patient outcomes exist in the world. We're just not always able to access them at the speed and the scale required. And in our field, wasted time really does equal to wasted lives. And this is really driven by the fact that medical decision makers are drowning in an ocean of information. And interestingly, I first encountered this need while building digital scientific platforms for the world's largest public health campaigns, and turning research into messages that can motivate the public and regulators to take effective actions in 20 different countries was not just quite hard, but it was really lacking in tools. So I am very, very excited to be building out Sorcero with my incredible team to combine cutting-edge AI with decades of public health learnings in an effort to support medical affairs teams as they strive to improve patient outcomes across the world. When I'm not working on Sorcero, and I almost wish I was still more of a swimmer than I used to be, I read a lot, mostly science fiction and fantasy. I also write sometimes, and occasionally I still write my journal in Elvish. I would say if I wasn't in this, I'd be an archaeologist. But I'm very excited to be here at this conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody, and likewise. So I hope the viewers and our audience, 384 people thus far, can really see the strength and depth of talent that we've got in the panel. So for the next 52 minutes, we've got 8 questions, and just for ease and housekeeping, we'll go around in the same order. We'll get each panelist to talk about each question. So that's Natasha, Neeraj, then John and Dee. And the first question that I'd like to pose to you is, what will the role of medical affairs look like in the future with regards to artificial intelligence becoming more mainstream?
That's a great question. I envision that we will be working very differently. We'll be faster and more effective as we can concentrate on other areas and these opportunity costs then that free up space and time. That we become faster in what we do is clear. How we do this is there'll be multiple tools available to us, that some are somewhat available today, but perhaps not so holistically. So, I mean, when we look at real world evidence and how we can extract insights from this to inform on regulatory decision making, reimbursement, clinical trial design, or even personalized medicine that we focus a lot at Roche. Imagine being able to identify the patients that respond the best at just a touch of your fingers. I mean, that would be amazing. And there are a number of other things that are included in this parameter, but I will actually leave some space for my panelists as well to talk about what they're doing too.
Cool. Thank you. I completely agree. We'll definitely come back to that. And Neeraj, what's your thoughts?
So for me, I mean, again, just to add to what Natasha said, fully agree. And then I would just add the power of content, because the whole medical affair is kind of dominated by content, medicine and, the drug discovery, clinical trials, and you name it, there's huge amount of content. And that's where AI, particularly generative AI, will have a lot of role to play. It'll augment all the job roles and everything which humans took ages. I would say it'll become much more augmented faster. So definitely it has a huge role to play.
And it's interesting that you say that in terms of the augmenting and a huge role, because the rate at which science is progressing, it's almost incomprehensible for the human mind to keep up. So I guess Neeraj and John as well, and in addition to the question that we're just talking about, how can these tools, Natasha's mentioned some things, but from your perspective, how can these tools really augment and help that medical affairs process?
So maybe I can step in. So first of all, I agree with what Natasha and Neeraj have already said, and in answer to your question, Kish, I think for me, what AI will provide is a way for us to become sort of more efficient and more agile with getting that information that is needed, that we want to be communicating to our stakeholders, to our healthcare professionals. And I think it's going to allow us to become more targeted and more focused with what we do. And I think this is one of the powers that AI does provide. It's not there to replace anyone, but it's there to help us optimize and synergize what we're doing. And it's only going to be a benefit add or value add to whatever else we are currently doing. And then in terms of the fact that we do have a lot of data that's being generated, so much news out there, it will help us sort of look at what are the key things that we need to focus on, what are the trends that are coming to help us be more effective in how we communicate. And to what Neeraj was saying about content, it will allow us to generate relevant content based on the things that we are seeing that are resonating more strongly with our healthcare professionals, to ensure that we're not doing a one-size-fits-all, but we're actually communicating the relevant information to address the care gaps that we are seeing that our healthcare professionals are talking about.
Fantastic, thanks, John. And just before passing to Dee, I think I'd like to just bring together a couple of themes there. It's really interesting from Natasha's point of view. You're saying that insights, real-world evidence, personalized medicine in terms of the molecules and the interventions that we're putting into people. But then also there's the whole communication aspect around that as well, being completely personalized. So yes, I would agree there is the potential for AI to completely revolutionize it. But Dee, what's your thought on that question in terms of how AI could revolutionize medical affairs and make things as it's become more mainstream?
We've always had a treasure trove of data, but data is only as useful as the decisions that they can support. And I think with AI, as my co-panelists spoke about, the first thing is actually having a comprehensive view of all of the data you have at hand, which is impossible to do when you're in a manual first workflow. You're always looking through a keyhole. So how do your decisions change when you can take a decision at the confluence of several data streams, and medical affairs particularly sits on top of that data pyramid? And then there is the analytics piece of AI, which is the kind of data narratives that you can tell. You can do longitudinal tracking of people, of information, of a product and of a patient. And that gives you incredible insights where you can actually personalize, whether it's messaging or it's medicine itself. Personalization, again, will come from being able to identify your key stakeholder across channels over time, down to that perfect persona where you really, really understand. Before then, you can use generative AI or generation methodologies to create content that they will resonate with.
Fantastic, thank you, Dee. And that's a nice bridge into the second question, which is about how can medical affairs harness innovative tools such as AI to better patient outcomes globally, and how are we already doing it? And how are each of you already doing it in your companies? And it would be really helpful if we could maybe go around and share a specific use case, an example, and maybe your personal learning from that process and experience. So we start with Natasha.
I think there are loads of examples. So one thing that we've been talking about today is the wealth of data that's around. So we know the medical data is being doubled every 73 days, and that's not going to stop. So we're actually in the process of developing a systemic literature review tool using AI, which will allow us to have more findable, more accessible, more interoperable, and more reusable data. So we can standardize the access and have a better overview. And that should allow us to have overview of the data and allows them to generate and analyze, generate insights. So this is still in the works, nearly finished. But I think to your point about what tools are we using, we're also creating a chat GPT that we can use internally because of the guardrails that are so strict for our use. And then I know Neeraj has got some examples that we both cover on, which is really moving into the omni-channel approach. So we have in some affiliates really got some good examples in place of how we can track open rates of mails and follow these next steps through what physicians want and need, so that we can really work on that communication side of providing them with the right information at the right time, the right place, what they want and not what we want to tell them. So perhaps I'll just hand over to Neeraj, because I know she's got some good examples there as well.
Absolutely. And before I go into the examples, I would say one of the key examples I'll quote from what Dee was mentioning in terms of the narratives from these KPIs, because that's one thing I do feel with pharmaceuticals, the in-field teams, whether you call MSLs or sales reps, they are the lowest common denominators, and you cannot give them the plethora of dashboards and number of KPIs. What they need is the insights, the crux of the insights, and that's where I think AI and generative AI has a huge role to play. So that's something where we are already working on, and that's something which is coming along quite well. In terms of some tools, things like channel preference, the healthcare professionals' channel preference, which, like human beings, we all know that we prefer one channel over the other. I mean, some people do like reading emails, some people don't. Some people like to attend webinars, some people don't, etc. So what we have created is the channel preference based on the historical data, which the MSLs and in-field teams can utilize, and before they go to the healthcare professional, they know which channel suits this person the best. We have next best action tool through which they can decide what is the next best action, prior to the call and post the call, basically on that one.
And Neeraj, I'd love to come in there and just ask you, how has that next best action been received in terms of by field teams, whether they be medical, commercial? How is it? Have they perceived it as a threat to their autonomy and their role, or have they embraced it and thought it's really helpful and really taken it on board?
No, it is very, very, I would say very, very, it is taken very positively. The thing is, they don't even realize the whole complexity of AI algorithms running in the background. What they receive is the simplistic email that, this is the person you're going to, this person is more virtually driven or face-to-face or email driven. They know the channel preference. They know, and if it is commercial rep, they also know maybe the sales predictions around that area that, this is the sales prediction you should keep in mind. In terms of the email frequency, this person opens the emails frequently, or this is the time, and all of that around, the email frequency, time, and subject line, etc., is kind of provided to them.
Sure.
So all of that they receive in the very, very simplistic email format. So very positively.
Right. Okay, so it's a case of getting a personalized view of your people that you're seeking to serve, essentially. So thank you, that's really good. And Natasha, I'd love to just come back to you briefly about, you mentioned right at the beginning about AI and 1980s and robots and things, and the question that you just answered in terms of this stuff is at the touch of a button, and you seem really excited about that. Have you got any other examples that you think that our 451 attendees might like to hear?
I think something as simple as a chatbot, right, that we're accustomed to using can be applied for patient services. So we've got chatbots that we use to improve, to enable patients to get information at 24-hour services, answer questions, provide educational content, even like layman summaries using translations, etc. And I think those kind of applications are really useful because they alleviate as well the pressure from a physician. And this is what this is about, is how can we enable physicians to enable the patients to be more informed, and again then allow for better decision making. There's also the wearables that we still have data issues on, obviously, but wearables have so much data that we could pull from in terms of patient monitoring. Telemedicine that kind of had a peak moment during COVID is still something that's really important, especially in countries where there's a big distance between physicians and patients. And And then moving into diagnostics, we have something called the UPath diagnostic tool, which is like a patient-centric platform for histologists to liaise with lab technicians and histotechnicians to be able to retrieve all the digital slides, etc., for pathology. And I think those kind of platforms really help communication between, and thereby also simplify methods.
Fantastic, thank you. And so what I'm hearing across that plethora of examples, you're clearly excited about it because there's a whole load of them there. And there's a common theme here, which I'd love John and Dee to pick up on, but it's the democratization of the whole, the barriers, the access, the cost to entry. What it seems to me is solutions that may have been very, very expensive or complicated or time consuming even like 1, 2, 3 years ago, let alone in the 1980s, are suddenly at our fingertips. So John, what's any examples that you'd like to talk through, use cases, and how it made you feel?
Yeah, I think I'll pick up on the next best action example that Neeraj actually mentioned, because I think adopting things in medical affairs is sort of slightly different, or we have to take a slightly different approach to just make sure that the use cases are appropriate, that there is appropriate change management, appropriate training. Because traditionally in medical affairs, we've always been talking about, our key USP in medical affairs is, insight generation, but also talking about the data and educating. So it's about understanding where can something like next best action enhance or optimize or add or support our medical value proposition. Because we need to make sure that we take people on that journey slowly and that people are buying into this. So I know Neeraj was saying that it's sort of next best action is, it's quite simple and people are very accepting of it. I would say we just need to be careful and not assume that everyone will be sort of taking it in that way, because there are sort of certain thoughts about things like artificial intelligence. People are still uncomfortable with it, and I think it's important to just approach it in the right way and not to, again, do a one-size-fits-all for everyone, but really ensure that we're addressing people's concerns. But I think for medical affairs, I think next best action can provide a great opportunity to enhance or optimize that scientific engagement by understanding what is an HCP's preference for what data, for what information. Again, you mentioned channels, and then ensure that we can share that information at the moments that matter and of value to that healthcare professional to allow them to make the relevant decision ultimately for the benefit of their patients.
Okay, fantastic, thank you. And just before I come to Dee, there's a question. This is the first. There's 15 questions in the chat that are, or the Q&A that are open. I'm kind of working through. And this, I'd like to build on your point that you mentioned, John, here, and you'll see why this question is coming up. But there's a question from Nicholas. Is there an opportunity for pharmaceutical companies to use AI to identify knowledge gaps HCPs may have, thereby building medical education programs that are relevant to our external stakeholders? So I'll come to Dee, and then maybe John, if you want to come back in on that as well, please do.
Sure. That was, by the way, an excellent question. It was going to be one of the examples that I wanted to give. So first and foremost, it is extremely exciting to see not just the excitement, but actually what AI has already done. And that's always the real marker of whether a technology is going to make a change in the world of business or the world of work, is whether people are already realizing value from it. Our customers, for example, are using and have seen value for a number of different ways. One is one of the users of our platform is actually helping pharmaceutical companies or the manufacturer understand where there are gaps in knowledge, whether that knowledge is and particularly where the knowledge gaps are impacting clinical practice, so that they can get to it really fast and then create what content and asset might be needed to address that gap. So absolutely. So to Neeraj's point about the narrative and the analytics that can come out of AI use. So one of the ways we use AI is to do that. And our customers find immense value in being able to detect that gap very fast. I think building on that, the other part that's important here is most of the content we work with is unstructured. It's long form content. It does not lend well to traditional tools. It doesn't lend well to BI. To unpack it and to analyze it and then to actually capitalize on it at scale, you're not just looking at AI to do the data normalization and enrichment, but you're also looking at AI augmented workflows where you have standard way of doing things, but you have little pieces of AI services that, whether it's summarizations or recommendations, that's helping you go through that content at scale. And our customers are finding value, I want to say, in both.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. That's really helpful. And we've got 35 minutes left. Just scanning through the questions in the chat and the ones that we've got prepared and looking at, I'd like to move forward because we rightly work in a highly regulated industry. We ultimately we put molecules into man and we work in human health. Therefore, there's significant regulation around everything that we do. And the pre-prepared question that I'm going to go around the room with is, how can we create regulatory safeguards to de-risk AI adoption? And also, how can we leverage existing networks and knowledge and ways of working with regulators to shape regulation positively in this regard? And then, so we'll go around the usual order, and then I'll read through the chat and build on that with some chat questions, if that's okay. So, Natasha, what are your thoughts?
I think it's clear that there are serious consequences for things to go wrong, so we need to take this seriously as well. It's about being transparent and understanding where our gaps are, and finding solutions for how we can minimize these as much as possible. And I think the most important thing we can do is really that we work together, because I think we all sitting here in different pharma companies, but we have the same problem. So we have an increased share voice that we can collaboratively work on, and work with authorities to find the best solutions. I think that's probably the way forward. The risk that we have is that the slower we are at doing this, the slower we are actually at getting and using these tools. And so that's the caveat really, is if we aren't able to act within a certain level of speed, then we might be risking, like Dee was saying, wasting patient lives. I think time is of essence at the same time. So it's that fine balance.
Okay, thank you. And Neeraj, have you got any thoughts on the regulation and how we can safely apply and use these tools?
So one thing I would say is with AI and generative AI, because we know that this is such a powerful thing, anything becomes multiple fold. So any bias, for example, a human may have in mind, it'll be on steroids. So it is, something we need to keep in mind. So because we work in regulated industry in general, we need to be careful. Any sensitive data, of course, we do not put in public domain, particularly around patients and, anything sensitive at all. Again, different cultures, different countries, we need to keep data privacy, GDPR, and all of those things definitely in mind, and keep those boundaries, respect those boundaries, etc. In terms of medical and commercial, where we work on particularly, we need to make sure, because with this AI and generative AI, the line is becoming finer and finer between the two, although we all want to kind of have the customer perspective, etc., but we need to be cautious of the fact that we are still a regulated industry. We need to make sure we keep the right balance and not sort of break that.
Brilliant, thank you. Couldn't agree more. John?
I think your question is about how do you de-risk this. I don't think you'll ever de-risk it. I think the risk is always there. It's about how do you mitigate the risk and how do you sort of account for it. And everything, there's always a risk-benefit analysis that needs to happen before you take something on. I think a lot of the things that Natasha and Neeraj said, I completely agree with. I think as a responsible developer of AI, that company or that body should be sort of adhering to specific principles around fairness, about transparency, about data privacy, a lot of things that have already been said. But just want to pick up on the bias piece that Neeraj mentioned, because a lot of the data that's already available out there is already an element of bias. And if you do use that data, you're then multiplying that bias. And we want to make sure that whatever we are producing with AI is safe, is applicable. And so part of those principles that I was talking about, that I just mentioned, we also need to ensure that the right quality of data is being used in order to make sure that the outputs are beneficial and are valuable for the end user.
For sure. It's the old garbage in, garbage out, isn't it? GIGO, I can remember from my A-level computing, which is should probably dust off given the age of AI.
But I think it goes beyond that.
Okay.
I think sometimes the data is great. It's just, is the data representative of the people, of the populations that we're trying to serve? So even though the data is amazing and it's clean.
Well, is it great then? Is the data great? Does it not need a real-world evidence overlaid onto it as well? Is it? How do we approach things? Because it's the real-world evidence, the RCT. It's that dynamic, isn't it? It's that what's the word? Conflict. For instance, there's some physicians only believe in real-world evidence, some only believe in RCTs. So is it up to us as an industry to use AI tools to merge them together somehow? But yeah, okay. And I'm just quickly, just for time, I'm really sorry, but we're going to come to D because I'd like to bring in, we've had 3 brilliant answers, so I'd like to ramp it up a notch in terms of, this is quite a hard question. So sorry about this, D. But anyway, A is from Andrew Dobb. Thank you very much for putting it in the chat. AI is seen as a black box, quote unquote, from IT teams across the sector. With data security being a huge aspect of medical communications, how can we trace how the data is processed to ensure it is secure? And how can we cite the source insights when generative AI is used in medical writing?
This is an excellent question, one that I love answering. So I'm going to give my answer in parts, if you will be patient with me. So there are 4 ways of looking at it. There's a business aspect of it, of where you're planning to apply AI. Is it a low, a medium, or a high-risk use case? And that will determine also the security around it. So for example, if you're trying to use an algorithm to determine if someone gets insurance coverage, that's a very high-risk use case. Correspondingly, if this is potentially a knowledge base of pre-approved material that's accessed via a chatbot, that's a much more low-risk use case. So you can decide where you need expert intervention in the delivery of the solution. So that's one way of risk mitigation. I think there's a technical aspect of it, which is also in the question, which is, how do you deploy it safely? I think first and foremost is tuning. So how are you actually tuning a particular model, and can you explain the tuning and the reasoning behind it? There are ways to do it somewhat explainably, and where you can kind of go back and ground your model and how it's performing to actual real world verified data. So there is a way of doing that. Number 2 is when you're doing generative, you can absolutely put in a disclaimer that this was generated by AI, but in many cases, particularly with medical writing, the generation is a draft 1. It is meant to support a medical writer to take it to completion. So you're able to check in for things like hallucinations, highlight where a citation may be off, etc. And last but certainly not the least is in the user experience of all of this. We are used to being digital all the time. We have certain expectations of how software will behave around us. And I think we need to factor that in when delivering sort of software workflows in the enterprise, is how do you build in prompts and helps and notes so that a person using the system over time can develop trust in what that system is producing, either by being able to give feedback, not accept a suggestion, and having basically more control over the output.
Fantastic. And one of the things that you mentioned was hallucinations. Could you please talk us through and talk the audience through what that is and why it happens and why it's such a thing to be important to be aware of?
So I'm going to keep this in layman's terms.
Please, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So basically, think of it as an engine that is motivated to give you an answer. So its entire motivation is to produce a response. So if you ask me a question, I don't know the answer, I'm more likely to tell you that I don't know. But a system is more engineered often to give you one at any way. So it tends to make up, as it were, from whatever content it has, an answer that sounds about right, or in some cases can sound very, very right. So if you don't have a database or a set of data to compare with and ground it, for example, if you're doing citations, if it's manufactured a citation, you need some way of checking to see that that citation actually exists in the real world. Or if it's generated a summary and it's come up with a term or a concept, you need some way of checking with the original content to make sure that they haven't completely made it up. So for example, in our system, it'll show up as these highlighted sections, right? Where somebody who's an expert can look at it and say, hey, these bits look a bit suspicious. Let me make sure it's okay. But that's sort of the hallucination process. And over time, it can get exercised from a system. But yeah, it'll take an expert to supervise.
So humans will, how long will humans be needed in this process? And I'll just put that up to the panel.
Always.
Well, and why?
Always.
Why? What's the reasoning behind that? Give us some examples.
So when I look at this, I look at it as my workflow. This is how I am working. If I was writing, I would write something, then I would edit it, then I would check the citations, I would edit again. It goes through several loops, even if it's a pure manual process. Bringing an AI assist into the system is accelerating my pace, but it's not inherently taking away the importance of my reasoning, my expertise, my logic, or really my argument, because I am still the one who's presenting the argument. So instead of looking at it as I'm correcting mistakes, I'm sort of collapsing the editorial process to the very minimum, and being able to do a lot more than I would normally. You know, we sometimes talk about giving ourselves superpowers.
I could add as well that, for me, I mean, it is, as Dee says, if I was to apply it to myself, it's the repetitive tasks, So sometimes we have our perspective, we have the, our expertise, which we want to add, but, the plethora of all this kind of logistical work and sometimes repetitive work takes away the energy and time. And that's where AI can really help us, and just multiply that with, all the efficiencies which we can gain across the teams and organizations.
Fantastic, thank you.
When we think of diagnostics, for example, using ophthalmology or any X-rays or things that are not so accustomed to the human eye, it requires not just from tiredness, but we might not see those finesses. And I think that's where AI can alleviate that and provide us with, these are the examples where we think there's a positive, but it needs a human touch to be able to really certify that.
Fantastic, thank you. John, have you got anything you wanted to comment on that?
I was just going to say, look, all humans, we're always evolving and we're always learning, and we can't expect the machine to be doing that all the time. And for example, as a signatory, and I'll go back to, traditional medical affairs stuff, what I used to be not comfortable with signing before, or if I didn't have that experience, the more I've been exposed to content, the more I start looking at risk, what is okay and what isn't. The decisions I'm making now are probably not going to be the same ones I used to make before, and vice versa. And so I think this is why you need that human judgment to make sure that what you're seeing is still relevant, and to make that judgment call all the time as to what is acceptable and what isn't.
Fantastic, thank you. And I really like that phrase, collapsing the editorial process and streamlining some of the more repetitive manual tasks where we are fallible and we will make mistakes. And how can we augment both human approach and AI intervention in that regard? So I'd like to come to one that might be a little bit controversial, and because there will obviously be companies which is different, and that's fine, but usually it's only senior leaders that can advocate for AI use, mainly because they control the budgets, or maybe because these discussions are happening right at the very top of organizations. How can we empower teams to advocate for AI use in their daily workflow? So, Natasha.
I think we have a lot of people that jump on it and are allowed to do pilots and test and try. And it's these case studies, not just within our industry, but also outside our industry, that provide this confidence to what AI can give. And with that, with AI, there's a lot of fear. Like we've heard about job losses. Am I going to lose my job? Is the machine going to take over? And I think here it's also about our senior leaders as well as us all get informed about what our AI really can do, so that we no longer have that fear. So there's a lot of upskilling and training involved to understand how the two really come together. So I think it's in our own responsibility as well to advocate for things that we believe in, and that voice will then reach above.
Fantastic, thank you. Neeraj, have you got anything to add to Natasha?
So the only thing I would add is that, yes, senior leaders are important because they need to have it included in their strategy, because that's how sort of, the culture of AI usage is enhanced in the organization. But then actually it's the teams who have to use it. So my message would be to kind of, the teams need to embrace it. Boat has already sailed. So it's something, they really need to try from the simplistic views and then come up with ideations and discuss with the subject matter experts in the organizations. So yeah, different tools are available, different tools are coming up. So keep eyes and ears open and use it.
Thank you. And I'd agree, the ship has already sailed in that regard. And it reminds me of an adage that I heard, that doctors, also AI won't necessarily replace doctors per se, but doctors that use AI will replace doctors that don't. And I think there's probably elements of that's quite true in medical affairs. Let's just go to John and Dee if they've got anything to add to that.
The other thing I would add is co-creation. This has to be done by the people who are obviously creating it, but the end user, to make sure that whatever you're creating is fit for purpose, i.e. in medical, working with our MSLs and medical teams to make sure that the solution is working for them and is addressing their objectives and their pain points. No point creating something that's not going to work for them and help them.
I see a lot for zeroing in on areas of daily work that could do with an increase in speed or a collapsing of distance, or you're having to handle more content. I find that when teams have a very specific problem around large volumes of content or speed or monitoring or analytics, it makes it easier to advocate for the bringing in, as it were, of new technology. And this is also a great place, as Natasha mentioned, for interdisciplinary learning. There are other fields and other industries that have done some great work in deploying AI across their enterprises and getting a lot of value out of it. It'll be interesting for the pharmaceutical industry to look at that and see how many of those applications could be adapted, customized, and then applied in the mission that we're all on.
Fantastic, thank you. And I'd like to combine a question in the Q&A and a pre-prepared one as well. So obviously the panel, clear advocates for AI, are interested in it, do it in their day-to-day jobs. The 402 people watching are clearly interested. They want to learn more. They're open to it. But why do you think there is resistance to it? What can be done to overcome that resistance? And then just bringing in Jordan Factor's question, the AI for R&D has been embraced and adopted much faster than in medical affairs, sales and marketing. So what do you think the obstacles are in that regard? And I'll open that to whoever wants to answer it.
I can start with the resistance. I think we touched on that a little bit. I think for me, there are three components about being successful in life, and that is at work. It's the growth mindset, skill sets, and the tool sets, and the combination of those leads to a growth set. So if we don't have this growth mindset and are open to taking on new opportunities and trying this out, then that's a big limitation. The skill set is how we use these tools, and the tools are always going to be changing. So I think the resistance is also there in terms of some of the caveats there are in actually the guardrails and the way forward, and the fear we mentioned about people losing their jobs and not quite understanding. But it's also a little bit, when we think about the speed at which tools can be developed, quite fast. And then you're struck with guardrails, but you're also struck with this whole upskilling aspect, which can take a very long time. maybe so long that in the meantime there are new tools available, and that can feel overwhelming and at a cost. So yeah, I think that's a big question. What is the cost going to be for AI, and how much are we actually putting aside to cover this? And I'll leave the R&D question. Yeah, sorry.
I'd just say also the cost of not, right? To Dee's point, right at the beginning of this, wasted time is wasted patient lives, and I would probably suggest that we can't let medical either paternalism or the feeling that we know best because we're trained as doctors get in the way of, if there's tools that can assist us. Even the explosion of wearables, and there's a question with that which I'll come in, but if somebody told me as a medical student only 2004 to 2009 that I could get a watch that could do an ECG by touching my finger, my head would have been like exploded. So the rate at which things are coming, let's just open our minds to them, learn about them, research them, and see how we can best apply it. I'd like to bring another Q&A panelist, Q&A that's in. This is from Doug Morton, working in IT within medical. Great answers to the questions. How do the panelists, thanks for that, Doug, that's very kind. How do the panelists think we can respond to healthcare professionals and patients using AI themselves, and possibly drop traditional communication channels and even going directly to data/information themselves through AI tools? So I thought that was quite interesting, and I'll put that out to the group to see if anybody would like to answer it. And if not, we will come back to it, because that's quite a tough one. But go on, Dee, go on.
So the thing is that doctors and patients are already using AI, or are already using the web broadly to access information. I mean, I think as a patient myself, or other folks that I know, are constantly using AI to find out how to be better treated, or whether my headache means I'm dying, because apparently per the World Wide Web, a headache is a straight, quick path to death. But the real risk here is the industry not getting ahead of it, because as the manufacturers, we are the keepers of the best, most reliable information. So if we could flip the switch on that, or actually turn the tables on that, and become the place where patients want to go to access that information, where physicians want to go because they know they're going to get timely, reliable, trustworthy, updated information, that would indeed solve the problem. And I do believe that effective and targeted use of AI to get all of that content wrangled and served up accessibly is a great, great mission, and one that should be done before we all Google ourselves into oblivion.
And other search engines are available, but yeah. And Neeraj, sorry, you're going to come in?
No, I was just saying that trust is a huge factor, which Dee touched upon, because the more trust we will build, I mean, resistance sometimes is a good thing, because we also do not want to kind of go blindly into which generative AI is doing. I mean, we know there are hallucinations and there are risk factors, but as long as resistance doesn't become the strained wall, that's something we need to keep in mind. And the more, I think, efficiency we will build into the tools and all of that, then the trust factor will come, and physicians and patients will use it more and more. In terms of one of the examples I can think of making things faster would be when for example, in-field teams or patients interacting with healthcare professionals, you could have these tools summarizing their conversation, which is something, which could be used later on by healthcare professionals and market researchers to kind of, work upon. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I'm just trying to, Tom had a question in the chat, which I'm trying to scroll through and find, because it's kind of relevant. And it's, again, there's one related to it. So it's on the question around, so the explosion of generative AI, when it came onto the scene November 2022 with ChatGPT, and then 3, and then 4 came out, and 5 is coming at the end of the year, I believe. But this was all based of data available on the open internet. And obviously, as we've touched on and the panelists have shared, there's patient safety concerns in terms of data and personal data concerns for good reason. So what's the trade-off between using models that are trained on the open internet and ones that are walled off within their own environment? And I'll put that to the group, and then I'll find Tom's question and just make sure that we've answered it.
think for me, using the data that's more in a more sort of protective environment, the quality is probably going to be better. You know what that data is. It's probably better curated, higher quality. But the devil is in the details. You need to know what is that data, what is it saying. So I think there are pros and cons, and you need to assess which data source you go after. I don't know if Tom is talking about a specific data source.
I found his question. So, Hi Medical Affairs AI team, just wanted to get your thoughts on governance approach and how it has to evolve to meet the demands of the organizations we serve whilst keeping the technology powerful.
Okay, slightly different question.
Yeah, but
there's a way that I can address that. So I think maybe here the concern is a little more around the models or the algorithms we're using in their world of, is that it, or the data itself? Because if it's about the data, I would kind of double down on what John was saying, is that, so the pharma company will have the data that they collect, which is your source of first party, the data you buy, which is your second, and then you have the world of public data, which could be literature or anything else, that's your third party data. And the temptation is to believe that the larger the data set, the better the insight, which is actually kind of flipped. The more focused and more tuned the data set and the more tuned the model, the better the end results. So if you know what you're trying to get out of the data, then you can pick the model that does the best in sort of doing that thing with data, whether it's labeling or whether it's inference or summarization. You can tune it to your particular specifications in your secure environment and get some incredible output out of it. But it's actually more about going small and focusing rather than taking the one ring to rule them all approach.
Okay, thank you. And I'd love to just come back to the next best tool, because there's been a lot of discussion about that, and there's quite a short, sharp question, which is about, can you elaborate on the next best tool? What inputs does it take, and what or how is the output represented? So if somebody could take that one and talk through that with just practical points, because I'm guessing it's an anonymous attendee, but I'm guessing they would like to implement it and they just need a bit of a mini masterclass.
So in short, I would say next best action can take any inputs, basically, depending on what sort of, actions you want the marketeers or in-field teams or whosoever it is to take. The way we created, basically, initially it started with all the key messages and the calls, planned calls, etc. But then we kept on adding channel preference to it. We added sales predictions to it, and we sort of added different AI tools on top of it, and we will be adding generative AI on top of it. So you can enrich it as you want it, and especially again for medical affairs, you can have different sort of content.
Okay, and then I'd like to bring this in and open this up to everybody, because there's another one about NBA, and this is from Mark Rees Saunders. No relation, but did used to work with him in AstraZeneca. So what does state-of-the-art NBA look like for MSLs? Really important. And should it be more sophisticated than the examples discussed? Need to know what experts are doing from clinical scientific perspective, social media, publications, congresses, etc. So a bit of a comment as well, but would anyone like to add anything to that in terms of the highly specialized role that the MSL plays, aggregating all this stuff in terms of science and congresses and papers and everything?
Yeah, maybe I can start. So for me, NBA, when it comes to medical and MSLs, it's there to be a buddy to the MSL, to support them with their core planning, with their congress engagement, with their scientific engagement. And it's down to us or to the organization to design it in a way to make it useful for that MSL. And this is why that co-creation is important, to understand from the MSL, how could a tool like this support you, not replace you, but support you in making your job easier and even more effective and more valuable. And some of the examples you mentioned in the question there around understanding what is that HCP's involvement in publications and clinical trials on social media. So if an MSL is about to go and see them or meet them at Congress, if we know what they've recently tweeted about the subject, or what their views are, what their sentiment is around a specific topic, that could help making sure that conversation is more focused, more targeted, more valuable, both for the MSL, for the company, but also for the healthcare professional, because the MSL is going in knowing this is what the HCP is thinking, and this is how I can help them potentially with their question to ensure I'm not just going to be pushing a lot of information at them, but I'm going to be really focused in what I'm going to be talking to them about. And then the tool can make suggestions about content that then share with that HCP following the discussion. Or if there's a webinar happening where the HCP may benefit from attending, the tool can make that suggestion to say, by the way, there is this webinar happening, consider inviting this HCP. But key thing here is that MSL is in the driving seat and is making all the decisions. This is just giving them insights to help them make the HCP customer experience even better.
Brilliant. John, thanks. That's a really eloquent answer. I'd love to have heard more, but we've got 5 minutes left. So I wanted to bring in Melody Davis. Do you think that medical affairs is at the point of realizing that they need formalized training functions within the department to upskill and reskill on AI and all the other pieces of data and processes that are in constant flux?
I think there's definitely a need for upskilling and training. I mean, we've talked about this fear of AI, and that comes from not knowing, not understanding. So I think that's definitely one part. Then when you finally have tools, that's the other upskilling. That's really how to use them and what can you get out of them. And that needs to be really clear, especially when we look at, when we want to scale up things, not just something in one department, but maybe for the whole organization.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I'd love to go around the room and just get people's take homes and a minute each or so, just to their summary and their close. But before we do that, thank you very much to everybody who's put questions in. We've answered 15 or 17 because I pressed dismiss by accident for 2. So sorry about that. But there's still 55 that are open. So we will come back to you. Daisy, who's in the background, who's put this webinar together and deserves a massive shout out and a big thank you. We'll be in touch via various means, and we'll aim to make content and put it out to answer the questions that we can. With that, thank you to the panelists. And if I just pass around the room in the same old order, and then we'll let Dee close out the webinar. So Natasha.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for your great engagement participation today. I think for me the key takeaway is about advocacy. We need this call of action. We need to be able to speak up and talk about what it is that our needs are and why we need AI. So the call of action is that we should all feel empowered to have that shared voice to increase it across our organizations, across our industry.
Key takeaway for me would be ethical. We know that so far, whatever we have built, imagining Legos, which generative AI is kind of, whatever it has seen, it spits out. So it's our responsibility sitting in the organizations to create ethical data from now onwards, so that, in future, we can look into the trustworthy data and the AI tools.
And for me, the key takeaway is don't reinvent the wheel. Look at what's already existing, what can be leveraged, and don't forget about your other stakeholders that need to be involved in terms of educating them. So legal, privacy, compliance, regulatory, because you will need them and they need to be on the same page if you want to roll this out.
Thank you. This is an incredible conversation. To close out, AI is not just a technology that will transform medical affairs. It is here today. It is changing what is possible in the field. And the companies and the teams that are embracing it where it is most useful will thrive in creating accessible content, in generating insights and evidence, in personalizing engagement, and really delivering on the promise of smarter treatments and improved patient outcomes. At the same time, responsible innovation remains a key focus area. And I'm excited to have everyone join us in helping shape how we use this incredible technology on one of the most important missions of our time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So all it remains to be said is that we look forward to seeing people in the audience, the virtual audience in London for the face-to-face Reuters event and/or in Barcelona next year. And we really look forward to continuing the discussion. So thank you for your engagement. It's been a really exciting chat. I've certainly learned a lot. I hope you have too, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.